Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's program, Industry Pulse 2018 Manufacturing Workforce Report, the current state of the manufacturing skills gap. It is my pleasure to introduce your moderator for today, Denise Ball. Denise is a Workforce Development Specialist at Tooling U-SME. Denise, when you are ready, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thank you, Billy. Glad to be here today with all of you and talk about one of the most serious issues in manufacturing today, which is the skills gap and how it is affecting the national economy and local communities. Tooling U-SME actually released the Industry Pulse 2018 Manufacturing Workforce Report, and the most significant finding was that most manufacturers still aren't taking the necessary steps to combat the skills gap. And we've all heard that term, so I know this isn't a new word for you. The skills gap is a real threat, though, to sustaining the rapid growth in manufacturing industry. And ignoring this challenge just won't make it disappear. So today we're going to discuss what manufacturers can do to meet these challenges. And our panelists will share their experience and talk about what they're doing to address the urgent need to fill the skills gap. So today I'm joined by Janine Kuntz, Vice President of Tooling U-SME and Vice President of the Training and Development. Mike Freed, Manager in Manufacturing Solutions Workforce Development at Sinclair Community College, located in Dayton, Ohio, and also Delane Sloan, Senior Manager of Human Resources at FNP America in Troy, Ohio. FNP is a Tier 1 international automotive supplier servicing such customers as Honda, Toyota, GM. So Janine, Delane, and Mike, thank you so much for joining us today and really looking forward to hearing your insight. So first, let's talk about how we got here. Janine, I'd like to really kind of start with you about what is the skills gap, how did we get here, and why is it such a concern?
Thanks, Denise. Yes, I think you said it well when you said that we've all probably heard the term skills gap. And essentially we define it as simply a lack of balance between the skills manufacturers need and the skills employees have in the marketplace. And, that gap has really, as we know, been widening and getting worse as a result of retirements and turnover, the decreased talent pipeline that we're seeing, with the number of kids pursuing careers in manufacturing. And on top of it, the need for new advanced technologies and skills. So as all that technology advances, it doubles our challenges in the space of skills gap because those needs in the area of training and education become even greater. So when we did this study on the Industry Pulse, really it was intended to, we certainly knew there was a skills gap, and a lot of the attendees probably here joining us today are very familiar with that. But we wanted to kind of see how bad is it? Has it gotten worse? So we had done a study about 5 years ago and redid that to kind of get a pulse on how things have been. And the Tooling U-SME Industry Pulse report basically found that things are still pretty challenging, and actually in some cases, quite often the indicators and the metrics we were measuring were worse than they were even 5 years ago. Voluntary turnover, including that silver tsunami that people talk about, is getting to more of a crisis level. For many manufacturers, up to 20% of their workforce will be eligible for retirement during the next few years. We actually have a manufacturer we're working with that quoted to us that 68% of their machining operations was going to retire here in the next 5 years. So just many, many examples, but certainly the data also reinforced that. Another interesting stat was really that 43% of manufacturers indicated that they're averaging 20% or more in annual turnover. So these turnover and retirements are causing a loss of, an obvious institutional knowledge for organizations. And then we kind of touched on this a minute ago, but technology is accelerating at a pace, quite honestly, that's faster than the pace of people development, which is widening that gap that we talk about. And that really has been something plaguing the industry in particular in the last 5 years, and we see that growing here as we look forward. Skill sets have changed, and the applicants as well as the incumbent workers. So it's not just that new workforce, it's the ones that are currently inside the walls of our manufacturers that as that technology keeps moving forward, we're not doing the right amount of investment with those people either. So we're again seeing a gap in that place, you know, inside the walls of the manufacturing operation. So if we start talking about, you know, what's going on here and advanced technology, it is something that we're seeing, and as I mentioned, kind of really accelerating when you look at what's happening. And manufacturing, what the cool thing about manufacturing is it's really an industry built on technology and very rich with new things that are always happening at the heart of our operations. And some of those things that we see impacting us in manufacturing are, you know, things that we're talking about now with artificial intelligence, more advanced robotics and automation, analytics, the Internet of Things, you know, 3D printing. Many manufacturers haven't been able to train their people as fast as the technology is moving, and in some cases just can't even think about trying to tackle those new things because they're still battling some of the fundamental processes inside their organizations. And so while we see this as though investing in new technology is critical, without training the workforce to leverage those technologies and the abilities that those technologies bring to organizations, manufacturers may just operate, you know, kind of not on optimal speed, right? We're not really getting the most gain and productivity out of those new capabilities that the technologies and new materials and things bring to our industry. So we're really looking at how do you address that. If you don't train to upskill for today and tomorrow, we recognize the fact that, again, we're not really capitalizing all that new technology. So in terms of that, in terms of how that's affecting our manufacturers, we really see that that's affecting not only our operations, but really our ability to innovate as an organization, and it's affecting ultimately the manufacturing industry as a whole.
Great, great. Yes, thank you. I'd like to actually now hear from Delane at FNP America. They're a longstanding, you know, automotive supplier in specialty functional suspension products. So that's exactly what they do, is that tier one supplier. So Delane, can you just share how you're feeling the effects of the skills gap and how it's impacted you at FNP?
Sure. It has been very difficult to find people at all levels, entry level all the way up to professional level. It's hard to find people who want to work, who will pass a drug screen and background check, who will show up on time, and also have a strong work ethic. But most importantly, we're challenged with finding associates who have the technical skills that we need in the automotive manufacturing side. So to help solve this problem, we have started sending some of our select technical associates through the skills track program. Because we knew the value of training, almost 12 years ago now, we were the founding members of the Technical Advisory Board, along with Honda and several other manufacturing companies and area community colleges, and we helped develop the skills track web-based curriculum. So today, we're working with Sinclair Community College to offer that training to our associates.
Wonderful, great. So let's have you, Mike, kind of jump in with about Sinclair Community College and how they've been helping FNP America with this skills gap, with this issue.
Thanks, Denise. As Delane noted, we were one of a cohort of 4 colleges here in the Western Ohio region that developed the program with a number of industry participating employers under a Department of Labor grant going back to 2007. And those employers were looking for flexible training options that would help them address the shortage of skilled workers in their local communities. We have, more importantly, been able to sustain the program after the conclusion of the grant through involvement with employers like FNP. It's been a really valuable opportunity for us to partner with employers to develop and to deliver important job skills training to fill their needs that our employers are willing to pay for as part of their operating costs and not just use grant funding dollars to support the program. The program consists of 5 levels that cover mechanical, electrical, fluid power, controls and automation skills, that would generally be found in any maintenance environment and an advanced manufacturing environment. We deliver it as a hybrid program that is self-paced, and it combines online curriculum through Tooling U-SME with a variety of hands-on lab exercises that were developed as part of the original program in concert with our employer partners that are facilitated by our instructors at Sinclair that allow students to demonstrate competency in the various technical areas associated with the program.
Wow. So, Mike, how many people have actually been through the program and have been placed in manufacturing jobs within your area as a result of the program?
We've had close to 500, going on 500 students who have been in the program. The vast majority of those participants are already employed. They come to us sponsored by the employers. We have about 50 employers that we've worked with over the 10 or 12 years the program has been in existence, who are using it to train new employees, to upskill current employees, to meet their demands for associates with manufacturing and maintenance skills.
Great.
And out of
Delane, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
And then, we've had multiple students who have gone through the whole level of the program. We have other employers who may have very select needs in a particular area where they might send a student as a participant for just one particular technology area. So it's a flexible program that lets employers pick what they need for their particular business needs.
Great, thank you. And I've seen it, Mike. It's a great program. You have a lot of great hands-on equipment to support that. So I'm curious, Delane, how has this program impacted FNP?
Yes, Denise. So we've had approximately 34 of our associates start the program over the last several years. We've had 20 who completed what they call the green level. 15 have completed the green and yellow levels. 10 the green, yellow, and red levels, and we've had 7 people complete all the levels, green, yellow, red, and blue, which has increased our overall retention. As Mike discussed earlier, each color level is a different skill area. So that first level, the green level, is maintenance, fundamentals, and industrial maintenance. The yellow level is industrial electricity and fluid power. The red level is industrial controls and PLCs. And then the final blue level is automation systems and robotics. So our associates feel invested in the company. They like being a part of something bigger than just their job, and they're part of the solution, having been successful in the training. So it's really helped our associates.
Great, great. So, Mike, what other successes have you had with this program, and really, how has that impacted your community?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we've had about 50 employers who have been participating in the program since its inception. A number of them are people like FNP who have put multiple employees through the program. So we certainly think that we're supporting the local manufacturing base in our region with skilled training for their workforce, which is obviously an important benefit that we believe we're providing at Sinclair. It also obviously provides opportunities for individuals to gain additional skills, to be able to move into positions within manufacturing organizations that are higher paying and more skilled, which is also a good thing from our perspective for the individual participants who are involved. So we think we're not only supplying a pathway for highly skilled, well-paid jobs that can sustain and support local residents and, the community, but also the manufacturing economy as a whole here in the Dayton region.
Wow, that is great. That is good stuff. Wow. So FNP certainly isn't alone in being challenged with finding skilled new hires. I know we hear it every day across the country. And the Tooling U-SME Pulse report found that an astounding 99% of manufacturers are challenged with finding new hires. And actually, sometimes I hear them say, if they'll show up at 8 a.m., pass a drug test, we're good to go. So we hear that every day. So Janine, I'm curious, what else did this report find?
Yeah, thanks. I think like Delane described, the report found that the top challenges, that are facing the manufacturers industry in the next 3 years really all revolve around, developing, finding that skilled talent. And it's interesting because we definitely posed this not so much to the manufacturers when we did the study and the research of what workforce challenges do you have. We were more like addressing what challenges do you have, what kind of keeps you up at night manufacturing industry, and to see that the top 3 things that came out, as you can see here, were all around talent, really spoke volumes to the issue of workforce being a very critical element strategically for organizations to address. And those top 3 beat out other things that we certainly know are also challenges facing manufacturers, such as implementing new technologies, things along, obviously keeping costs down and, finding new customers. But here at the very top of that list was these 3 things. And something I wanted to point out on that research, I mentioned when we looked at this probably about 5 years ago, one of the things we wanted to see was comparing and contrasting. What got better, what got worse. I will say in this great story that Delane and Mike just went through, one of the things that we did see, which was a really nice improvement, was manufacturers teaming up with their academic and local associations and things to really kind of be partners in building their community and their workforce. So that was one real positive. The shift here you can see on that number 2 bullet, that one that says upskilling the incumbent workforce. That was fairly new. While it was an issue 5 years ago, it makes sense, as I said earlier, with all the changes that are going on in technology. 5 years ago, it was really about finding new people and getting them in the door. The number 2 issue was a little bit newer in the sense of, but what about our current workforce? So it wasn't just those new people anymore. It was also about what are we going to do to certainly retain our performers inside our organization and invest in those people. So as we kind of look forward, I want to share a couple, just like some quick stats here. But, because it kind of gets at, sometimes you look at this and we think about the skills gap and we talk about these challenges and then we say, okay, well, what are we doing about it as an industry? And I'm going to go through kind of a battery of a couple of these, but, and we asked a number of questions to try to really get at A, finding best practices, and then B, just seeing where we're at in the ocean on our journey to developing our number 1 asset, people. And as you can see here, 2 out of 5 companies train people to develop the right skills. So that's not necessarily a positive. We know that needs to be better. As you can see here, 1 in 3 is budgeting for employee development. Again, this isn't good. We need to, if you don't have budgets for things, right, that's where things get challenged. Money doesn't get spent, investments aren't made. And next, we have only 2 in 5 incorporate training for on-the-job trainers. And I'm going to stop on this one for a minute because this is something we really see quite prevalent when we're out working with manufacturers. And I'm sure those, Delane and Mike, as they joined us on the call here, are probably also seeing this. But what's happening often in manufacturing companies is that maybe your best technical person gets put into a role of doing on-the-job training. 2 things that we're seeing that are happening, that training, that moment in time is not being very structured. It's a little looser than we'd like to see, especially in an environment with high complexity technologies and, quite honestly, risks from a safety standpoint, things like that. But also, the trainers themselves aren't being trained on training. They're not being trained on how to take what they might know as a skill set and know how to deliver that in such a way that actually the receiver, the new employee, is able to really retain the information. So there's a lot of things that we're seeing there at that kind of that frontline person who's dealing with those new hires. And then also what we also know about those micro moments that happen when you're onboarding somebody, and certainly with the millennials, that we know that there's a challenge when those moments aren't done very well. They contribute to the very thing we want to avoid, which is turnover. So when we finally get them in the door and we find those right people, which we know is a challenge, and we start to onboard them, you can start to see where this becomes a critical nature. So we need to see that more than 2 out of 5 are incorporating training for their on-the-job trainers themselves. Next, you can see here is 1 and 3 is designing, designating personnel to manage training and employee development. Again, if you don't have someone leading it, I think we all know that in organizations, when you turn and say, who's responsible for this? And if you don't really have someone responsible, and we see here that the majority of times, 2 out of 3 times, there isn't someone owning this inside of an organization, that alone is going to be a challenge to move the needle. Another one, and kind of ending with some of these. Yeah, sure, Denise.
Oh, I was just going to say, what are these actions as far as, did you have any other thoughts around that as far as building that structured program?
Yeah, and we're going to kind of, I think, get into some of those things as we look at that here on this next slide is, only 1 in 3 offers a structured program, as you can see, but many actions companies are taking to develop and retain their employees are under their control. And so that's really where we'll spend kind of, I think, the next, few minutes here is talking about what manufacturers can do. So we know that some things might be out of your control, what happens in, sometimes what happens maybe in people's homes, what's being communicated to them in terms of careers in manufacturing, we can't always control. But once we look inside our own 4 walls and say, what are the things we can do, we thought we'd share some things, because there's a lot manufacturers can do. And the important thing that we really see is that doing something is better than nothing. And starting with some small elements, some small programs is critical. Where we find things sometimes fall apart is when, because the problems are big, as we can see, that we know that developing a structured, sustainable training program that's aligned to your business challenges and your new equipment or your new customer demands is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. So we always really recommend, if nothing else, start with something small and move forward. I think if you look here on the list here, partnering with educational institutions, a great example just got shared with you from Delane and Mike on that. So I think that was a really good example, and as I mentioned, we're seeing more and more of that. In terms of providing internal training, sometimes we can't always look outside our walls and maybe partner with a college. Maybe we can't afford hiring others to come in and do the instructor-led training. As I mentioned, really taking the time to invest and find those people internally who can be those mentors and coaches for your new hires is critical. We do see a lot of manufacturing offering tuition reimbursement, which is always a positive and certainly an element that helps in the whole workforce strategy. Creating an apprenticeship program, there's been a lot of talk about apprenticeship programs, and again, a lot of partnering with local agencies and schools on creating really robust, and they don't always have to be Department of Labor endorsed programs. They can be very organized by your own company, and even the small companies. We have a Cox Manufacturing in San Antonio, Texas, a small business that really saw that this was a huge shift for not only their retention, but their culture. And they really talked about how implementing that was in their control. They did the things they needed to do to fit their business, and then saw these benefits, not only retention, but as I mentioned, culture. Increasing their training investment in an organization, as we saw when 1/3 or so are investing and budgeting for training and development. That's a big challenge. And it's not uncommon for us to have conversations with maybe somebody who's a plant manager or a middle management who's saying, I can't get my leadership, I can't get the dollars. People are not understanding the connection between the scrap I'm having, or the quality issues I'm having, or the safety issues I'm having, with the correlation between my investment in people. And that's definitely a challenge. So we know, and we work and try to work with manufacturers on really trying to showcase, what is the true cost of turnover? What's the investment? What's the return on investment when you look at investing in your employees? So we know that that's important. When you look at strengthening onboarding processes, I kind of mentioned that earlier. That's a really big deal. It's a big deal to millennials, but it's a big deal to everybody. I'm not a millennial, but I know it's a big deal to me too. And that's something that, again, is within the control of manufacturers. A good example of that was an organization we worked with that I would say was pretty well down their journey, Pella Windows. in Iowa that was really well down their journey in, I'll call it learning and development. If you looked at their organization, you'd say they had a lot of good world-class learning attributes in place, but they stepped back and they really wanted to take it to the next level and spent that time to create, what were the competencies they needed, put a 6-week, strong onboarding program in place, train their trainers to build their training capabilities. So it's not always those that are kind of maybe starting from scratch that can really benefit from, taking a step back and looking at some of these things they can do to really improve their operations. And then you could see on here a couple others around hiring full-time trainers, building the qualification profiles. That's something we worked with an organization, Amstead Rail, that really took, again, learning culture was very critical to them. They really saw this connection between what was happening with their workforce and really the overall strategic direction and profitability of their organization, and spent quite a bit of time building out a skills verification system and very transparent career pathways. And sometimes while some of these things may sound maybe basic, but they take a lot of time, and as I mentioned, not for the faint of heart, but they are within our control when we put the time and effort forward. And then lastly, starting a pay for skills system to create career pathways.
Delane, did you want to maybe comment at all? Yeah, I was going to ask her too.
Yeah, so we wrote the skills track program into our training policy or our training process so that the technical group could be trained and would receive promotion and increased compensation after they successfully completed the program. So it's worked really well to tie in compensation with training requirements. Also, anyone that participates in the program that would leave the company before a designated time frame, they have to repay the cost of the training on a prorated basis. So that's another incentive to be successful.
Oh, wow. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. Janine, what do you think some of the other reasons that manufacturers really aren't taking the necessary steps to do those action items that you put up?
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you do the research, like I said, you look at it and you say, we have these challenges, and I went through those battery of statistics from the report and the research on purpose because it is sometimes disheartening when we know that this is a pretty big challenge that manufacturers in our industry, which affects our national economy and our standard of living, that we're having in our industry, and again, I think certainly in this country, around the skills gap. And when we look at the issues and the challenges it creates, as I mentioned, around productivity, safety, quality, innovation, we do scratch our heads and say, well, then why aren't we doing this? And I do want to start with the fact that I think it's easy maybe for me to say, as a learning and development kind of person who lives and breathes this, to say manufacturers in the end of the day are making things, right? That is definitely, as I mentioned, it's a very technology-rich industry, and it's what consumes a good portion of a manufacturer's time is the production side of making things and designing and ensuring quality and all those things. And so often what we find sometimes those barriers are around the things here you see: lack of commitment, funding, time, and just don't know where to start. And a lot of it has to do with this focus, as I mentioned. And, for organizations, it might not be something you see on the balance sheet. It's people and assets. But we truly believe that the number one competitive differentiator for a company is its people. And we often will say everybody can go out and buy the same equipment and the same materials, but it's the ingenuity and the skills of the people that are driving things behind the scenes, behind that equipment, running it, maintaining it, programming it, designing for it, is the very thing that will make an organization excel over one another. And it certainly makes an organization more likely to retain its employees. So when we look at that, it's about how do we figure out learning and development inside the walls of a manufacturer that has all these other things that they're plagued with to also keep up with, and not just the people side. And so that number one thing about lack of management commitment, when we see the highest level, certainly at a CEO level, ideal, but that's more often what we're talking about, small to mid-sized businesses, understanding the strategic value of people, as I mentioned, as a competitive differentiator, that's certainly where you start to see the needle move. Other times it's funding, but you could see that that's related to the first one, right? Funding becomes available when there's large commitment by your leadership. But if you're truly having funding challenges, there's so many programs across the country and the United States that are around supporting the funding of inside manufacturers and that teaming that you heard about. And I think Delane and Mike even talked about how they started with some funding, but even as the funding went away, they were then able, so it was a nice kickstart to what they do, or they did, excuse me. And again, we find that sometimes manufacturers don't even realize that could be a whole nother discussion here about what funding is available to them to make things happen. So, you know, it's really, other companies are recognizing the urgency, but I just don't know, you know, if it's enough yet that we're seeing, Denise.
Right, exactly. So I'm curious, just can you give us some thoughts on what companies can do to kind of overcome these barriers that you've just mentioned?
Yeah, I think, you know, that whole thing of stepping back, you know, and I mentioned first, you know, I think it's always important to start, you know, working with the ideal state of, if you don't have that commitment in place, you know, work towards that commitment of your top leadership. And while we've identified, you know, these 5 best practices, I think the thing I mentioned earlier, which is really important, is to find, though, manageable points to tackle if you're starting really from that ground zero. And I hate to say it, but there's a lot of manufacturers that are still sitting there at that stage with not with a lot of things to tackle and big plans to be developed, and it can become daunting, and that's the faster it gets put to the side, right? The larger the problem, it's easy to put to the side. So we certainly believe in having that kind of long-term strategy that looks at the sustainability of developing the workforce, working with the pipeline that we went through earlier, you know, connecting with the community. But if you follow these best practices of stepping back and identifying your business objective, even if it's small or big, it could be something like, we got a new piece of equipment. Our business objective is to train the people, onboard them, you know, hire new people for that. It really kind of follows somewhat of a simple methodology of then developing and defining, you know, what are those performance-based competencies that you need and models that you need in place, and aligning your learning solutions to those. All too often, we jump to the finding the solution and putting an instructor, you know, kind of bringing an instructor into an organization or putting some training in place, but it's not fully vetted to align to some competency and direction. So that little work up front, while, you know, is definitely time consuming, we find puts more structure into then really making sure that your number 3, that your learning solutions are really aligned to what knowledge and skills are needed. And then, as I mentioned earlier, number 4, they're structuring your onboarding program and on-the-job training. Again, this idea of, you work so hard to get these people in the door that we can't miss this idea of reinforcing a good experience and one that's really value add ultimately for the new hires. And then lastly, back to that management, you know, support, we've got to always keep in mind some level of measuring the impact, and it's a little harder in a manufacturing environment, which is easier to do when you think of just true production. People are harder, but there's definitely ways. We actually did a report on the ROI that, you know, if any attendees, you know, interested, we can kind of share that, because that gets into a whole side of how do you take and show to your leadership how investing in training has an ROI that's sometimes not always clear.
Great. Any other additional comments regarding that? I mean, that's a lot of good stuff, Janine.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing, you know, I would say back to what we find where things fall apart. If you said, Janine, you know, where do you say things mostly fall apart, is one, in the end of the day, manufacturers are going to be having to go back to, you know, if there's a quality problem, a production problem, you know, that is going to dominate their time. But when we do see that if you try to bite off more than you can chew, I would say that definitely can make things stall, makes it harder to kind of get a quick win and maybe show your leadership where things can work and how that did affect your scrap rate because someone knew how to operate your equipment better, and your maintenance, you weren't breaking as many tools, all those kinds of things, then you can kind of maybe go for a little bit more. And then secondly, unfortunately, sometimes we do see people maybe put some training in place that, again, isn't maybe aligned to a clear objective, or even sometimes isn't required and leaves it a little loose. We also see that sometimes then falling apart and losing its momentum from the get-go. But, as I mentioned, I don't want to make it sound overly complicated because it's important just to try to take those steps, get some success, and, be able to start to move in that journey of building a world-class learning organization that really complements and allows your organization to accelerate the value that's inside of the walls of manufacturers, as I mentioned, truly get at the ability to leverage this technology. And those are the organizations that we see are winning. We see the organizations that are able to combine their investments in technology and new processes with their investments with people. It's those companies that create the innovation capacity inside their organizations to excel when they're doing both of those, all say in tandem at a strategic level.
Mike, any comments on your side?
Well, I just want to, comment that manufacturing here in the Dayton region continues to be very strong, and our employer community continues to be challenged with finding skilled workers, and continue to look to Sinclair to help them prepare and train employees for their organizations. We at Sinclair are certainly committed to being a partner in that effort, and we are, thankful for the partnership that we've developed with FNP over the years to support the program. As Janine said a couple slides ago, one of the most critical things you can do is have management commitment, and there's clearly that level of commitment from our partners at FNP, and it really helps to make their participants successful in the program and help our program overall be successful and maintain its long-term commitment to our program and to supporting the manufacturing community here in our region.
Great. And Delane, I'd like to hear a final comment from you before we jump into all these great questions and answers that have been pouring in from our audience.
Sure. So as Mike mentioned, we also appreciate the partnership with Sinclair, and we really are thankful for the Skills Track program. It's really helped us fill positions from within the company with hard-to-fill technical maintenance positions. And as Mike mentioned, this area of Ohio is extremely difficult to find skilled workers, and we struggle every day to find good people. So we're really thankful for Skills Track and Sinclair.
Great. Thank you, Delane. And you know what, Mike and Delane, you guys are a great example of how, the three of us working together, with industry and with schools, really just making it a collaborative effort to figure it out, to figure out this skills gap so that we really can keep manufacturing great. So thank you, Janine and Mike and Delane. So now we're going to kind of open it up for questions. They've been coming in, and I do want to mention that the ROI report, ROI of training that Janine did mention, we can get that out to you. If you give us a question here, we can send that out to you separately like she mentioned. I know some of you have been asking this. But I've been noticing some questions coming in regarding training on the job, training those trainers, on-the-job trainers. And I'd like Mike to definitely hit that one about a trainer qualification. I know for us across the country, like Janine mentioned with Pella, we've been doing train the trainer sessions because it's needed. We need to equip them so that they can do that. But Mike, give me a little bit of a story on your side as far as trainer qualification as well.
Sure, Denise. We are, I think, maybe a little bit blessed as a part of a workforce division at the college as opposed to the traditional academic division of being able to be a little freer with respect to academic qualifications for folks who are instructing for us in the Skills Track program. We look for practitioners. All of our instructors that we've had over the years, and we've had about 6 instructors over the course of our involvement with the program have been people who have come to us after significant experiences in industry, who have long years of experience in production environments, doing maintenance work, maintenance employees, maintenance supervisors, and engineers. So when I'm looking for instructors, those are the kind of skills that I'm looking for, are people who understand, who've been there, who can, be good role models for our students as well. And it's not easy. That those folks don't really exist in large quantities. We've been fairly successful with using, recently retired people as kind of a pool to recruit from. Those people generally have a little bit of interest in wanting to give back to the industry. They kind of fit our delivery model pretty well. One of the challenges, obviously, is, as we've alluded to, everybody is looking for good, skilled maintenance employees, and if folks want to be working in that field, we really can't compete at the college with what they can be earning working in a manufacturing environment. So looking for people who are perhaps towards the end of their careers has been a pretty successful strategy for us, and thankfully we've been able to find enough people over the years to keep the program rolling.
Wow, that's great, because you really touched on an issue that I hear everywhere is finding instructors to actually do that training. I actually was talking with a state, actually Vermont has a model where it's almost like an apprenticeship to help the folks coming from industry to transition into being a trainer as well, and with the college up there. So it's interesting how they are really coming alongside of them and wanting to develop them because it's needed. It is so needed. I'm curious, Mike, we also got a question in here asking about, and if you or Delane could comment about whether employees are on the clock or not during the skills track that you do.
Well, we don't specify to any of our employers the arrangements with their participating employees. Generally speaking, I would say that most of our employer sponsors are paying for their employees to be in our lab when they're doing their competency-based exercises, and most are requiring their individual participants to complete their online curriculum on their own time. I'll let Delane speak to FNP's strategy, but again, I think that's, from my experience, is pretty typical of the broad base of our employers.
Yeah, Mike's correct. We pay our associates for their lab time, but their online classroom reading part of the training they do on their own time. So that's correct.
Great. Delane, would you mind giving just a little peek inside FNP as far as about recruiting new hires, skilled and even unskilled, just maybe some of the things you've seen over the last few years as you've tried to do that?
So since we're talking right now a little bit more about the skilled side, we have continued to struggle. It's gotten worse every year. I've been with the company 16 years, and the last probably 8 have been the biggest struggle for us, and we see more of our skilled people retiring and or getting close to retirement. So finding new people out there is very difficult, and we're in an area, as Mike mentioned earlier, that is highly concentrated with many manufacturers, and so we are in big competition with a lot of other companies for highly skilled folks. So as I mentioned before, one of the reasons we started the Skills Track program is people that don't have any outside training or outside experience that just started as an entry-level person here. They could have started as a temporary and eventually been hired, now can go through this, quasi apprenticeship program and go through the Skills Track program and work with our technicians and our maintenance people here on site and eventually become a maintenance technician, that they learned it all, through the Skills Track and through their work at FNP and their training at FNP.
And if I could just add, I think, in our years, we've seen a change with employers, and FNP is a great example of this, where people are recognizing that growing your own is probably a better strategy for long-term success than assuming that you're going to be able to go out onto the street when you have a given need and find people. Again, we've got a lot of manufacturers in the region. There's a lot of competition, and there's fewer people than there are available positions. So people like FNP who've adopted these grow your own strategies, I think, are having a better chance of success than what many of our employers who are not taking that approach are having.
Exactly, and the other good thing about that is they already have a proven track record. They come to work every day. They like FNP. They know the people. They know the processes. They may have run the machines. So there's better retention and buy-in because they've already experienced FNP. They've been here.
And this is Janine, if I could add, because I think that's an excellent, I mentioned one of the things, I think what you guys are talking about right now is exactly what we've been noticing. It was interesting that really showed up, as I mentioned in the report. I said the one good thing that, because the other information was a little bit, kind of wah-wah. It wasn't, it was a little bit depressing to read some of the stats that were coming back. But the thing I mentioned on the positive side was exactly what Delaney and Mike, you talked about was, and that's a lot of times how I refer to it too, as manufacturers kind of growing their own. And we're seeing that on a national level in partnering, whether it's with the school or, really just kind of owning this part of their supply chain, right? People are part of their supply chain. It's not just the components that are coming into an aerospace company putting together the plane. It's the people that are coming into there. And so investing in that supply chain equally as they would invest into another supplier. So it's a positive, and it is a movement we're seeing definitely more. And I think it goes back to that comment about Delaney, at your organization with FNP, seeing that that's also a differentiator because, as you mentioned, it's competitive. There's not enough people, and so you can't sit back, right? And we're seeing a lot of questions around the ROI and getting management's commitment. Truly, those organizations that are ahead of this are the ones that are going to win the race. They just will, because there's not enough people right now, and that's got to improve. We know that, but for the short term, it's a critical element for an organization to own this, right, and find the right partners. And there's so many partners with the schools and agencies and the MEP network, nonprofit organizations like ours. I mean, they're out there. It's just the manufacturer also has to come to the table too.
Right, and
exactly.
And actually, I'm curious, Delaney. It just kind of weaves into this whole topic that we're discussing. With the turnover and a cost associated with that. I'm curious of your thoughts of just what you have seen at FNP. If there's been a calculation of that cost or looking at that at all.
So we have looked at the cost of turnover, and it's fairly subjective, but it's anywhere from a few $1,000s up to, on the top end, it could be $8,000 per person, depending on, the level of position and what kind of training was involved. But there's obvious costs, recruiting, onboarding, administrative costs, on-the-job training. Then you've got lost production, which causes overtime, which causes morale issues because other people have to pick up the slack when you don't have people to fill the position. So there's a lot of subjective pieces to that you can't put a specific dollar amount on because it's bigger than just a money issue. Turnover causes so many other issues as well.
Good. That's good. And Janine, did you want to comment at all about that and what we've been seeing?
Yeah, and I think Julian said it well. It's really tough, and so we've been, obviously we try to do as research on many things as we possibly can, and a lot of it's around kind of this idea of trying to help manufacturers make, because we've seen a lot of questions come in around how do I make people understand in my organization that training is an investment or it has a return, and so we see this on an ongoing basis. And so looking at the cost of turnover, just like you said, we kind of went out and we're trying to get see what organizations actually measured as terms of, and typically the things they measured were a lot of the ones that you mentioned. The easy, I'll call it the easy basic, very clear. What was my cost of advertising? How long was maybe a position if I had to put temporary place help in there? What were these kind of, I'll call it hardcore costs related to the turnover? However, I think the bigger thing that you mentioned is the larger costs are all the things that are kind of sometimes unseen in that decreased productivity, customer satisfaction. But when we got the average from those that were able to document, I'll call it level 1 of costs, it was around $7,500 per skill, more in the skilled area. It went as a more towards this, almost double that when you looked at like engineering jobs and more some of the salaried positions. And, you know, of course, you know, part of the things that we talked about earlier are, you know, the question becomes then how do you prevent turnover? And really it's a lot of it is in the front end. We had, I won't even mention certainly the manufacturer's name, but we have a manufacturer we're working with that it was a staggering, almost 80% of their new hires, and it was in the hundreds of hires in their first year were leaving. And so they had all these issues that, as you mentioned, it creates beyond the obvious of the cost to go out and find them. But how do you go about improving that so that you can reduce your cost of turnover and reduce the amount of turnover is really a lot of it's around that, developing a strong onboarding program, demonstrating career pathways, because somebody might, especially in these manufacturing jobs and skilled trades that we're talking about, might start off if you get them in the door, but you want them to not just all of a sudden say, oh, I'm on to somewhere else. Let them understand what it takes to get to the next level. What are those career pathways they can take, and what are the knowledge and skills associated with that pathway so they can start to see, okay, I'm here. Here's where I need to go. This is the kinds of things I need to learn to get to that level, and here's the kind of compensation I could see. Making check-ins part of the process for new hires, right? Like make sure you're checking back in. We talked about training those trainers, making sure that the on-the-job training is very structured, validating that they actually learned what they were supposed to learn in the on-the-job training process. So there's lots of things that, again, as I mentioned, are kind of can be in the controls of a manufacturer that help not only, reduce improve, I'll call it employee satisfaction, but ultimately improve your retention and reduce your cost of turnover.
Wow, Janine, you even answered another question. I love it. There was another question that came in asking us about competency models regarding qualification, and Tooling U-SME is a strong proponent of a job qualification system. I mean, that is our standard, so to say, and that is so important. It really is a capstone, because you can train people, you can get people excited, but then in the end, we have to measure it and really make sure that they have grasped it and can actually demonstrate it. So thanks for hitting a few of these questions. We've got a lot coming in, so I just want to apologize. If we don't get to all of your questions, we actually are going to answer them and we can respond to you. There's been a lot of great questions. There's been questions about funding. I would encourage you in your state. I mean, we have people all over the country on this call. Definitely, talk with us. Give us a call. We work in each of the states. Happy to talk to you and have a conversation around funding that may be available, and even to continue the conversation on return on investment and how to engage management and, how to train your trainers so that you're having those skills. So I just want to apologize if we didn't get to your question. It is in there, and we definitely will try to. And one of the questions that came in, I just wanted to bring it up, is about younger people not understanding what manufacturing is, and how can manufacturers raise the awareness on what manufacturing is. So I think it's a great question. We keep hearing it, that the children are kind of going off and going to college, not succeeding, and, not realizing what a great viable career is in manufacturing. So I almost want to open it up to Janine and Delane or Mike, if you want to comment on any programs you've heard about helping the younger generation.
Yeah, I'll jump in. This is Janine. A couple things, actually. Interestingly, we, SME is part of, right now, we just kind of kicked it off. Actually, we attended a meeting in December along with 17, it's the CEOs of 17 other associations that are in skilled trades. So these associations are coming together as really trying to bring the volume or efforts of 17 different organizations that have a strong interest in helping improve the image of skilled trades. And it's all around mobilizing our efforts, investments, and resources as nonprofit organizations to improve that image. And so we've just kicked that off, Denise. I would say that's one thing that, and it's everything from, how do we let, everything from career counselors and parents and students know about these career pathways and what they look like today. Another effort we're doing is there's an organization out of DC. We sit on a national coalition of career counselors, and with a number of other organizations. It's being led by MSSC, if you're familiar with the organization that has the production technician certification in manufacturing. And again, mobilized a group of organizations to work with career counselors. And so we're working with the National Association of Career Counselors to help career counselors who are very strapped for their own resources to, again, be educated on what is manufacturing careers really look like today, so that the communication that happens with young students is appropriate and relevant to today. And then lastly, I would say our education foundation at SME, and it does quite a bit in this space where we partner, it's called PRIME, it's Partnership Response in Manufacturing Education. And I know earlier when we were talking about the Skill Tracks program, we mentioned Honda, and they're an example of an organization that partnered with our foundation and said, I'm doing a lot inside the four walls of Honda to create competencies and onboarding, but I'll help invest and put resources and expertise and subject matter experts to work with the local high school near my plant in Ohio, but I don't have maybe call it the time. And so basically they invested in this program called Prime, where they actually gave the money to our education foundation. Our education foundation partnered with the school and the company and did almost a gap assessment of what the school had in terms of curriculum, teacher training, equipment, and Honda's money then went and was focused, laser focused on the things in that school that would help get it to the level of what was needed by the local employer. So lots of things. Sorry, I took up a lot of airtime, but that's obviously what I'm really passionate about. But good, important question.
It is. And everybody, check out What's So Cool About Manufacturing. It's a great video contest in the state of Pennsylvania that I'd love to see duplicated across the country. It really engages everybody, especially in this technology-driven society. So check that out, What's So Cool About Manufacturing, another great tool to get the younger kids involved. Delane or Mike, anything that you've seen regarding getting the younger generation as we wrap up?
Yeah, so this is Delane. So we have started participating. Our local high schools in the area have started having Manufacturing Day, where they bring high school juniors and seniors to our facility, and they get to tour, and we talk to them and show them what we do and tell them about careers here, as well as every year there's a career fair for high school seniors. It's Career Day, and we have it at a local arena, and we participate in that, as well as our area does have a career technology school for juniors and seniors in high school that aren't going to go the college route, that can go through a career technology field, and we try to participate with them as much as possible.
And just to kind of dovetail on what Delane said, Manufacturing Day, which is obviously a national effort, is something that the local manufacturing community throughout the greater Dayton region has really taken and ran with. Our local trade association, the Dayton Region Manufacturers Association, does a great job of coordinating that and working with schools, high schools, middle schools throughout the region. We think that it's the largest manufacturing day across anywhere in the United States. There's typically 5,000 or so participants in that, on an annual basis, and that's really been a great entree into the schools, into the middle schools as well, and has led to some other activities that the association has done to try to kind of get that message out to the schools and to the counselors and to the students.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. We're right at the top of the hour, so just thank you, everyone. We'll get to your questions. Feel free to reach out to us if you have additional questions, and definitely for more insights from the Industry Pulse 2018 Manufacturing Workforce Report. Read more about the steps you can take, build that strong training and development program. So visit us. We invite your questions, and thank you for your time, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.
At this time, on behalf of Tooling U-SME, I would like to thank you all for joining us today and for your participation. I would also like to thank all of our speakers for sharing their expertise with us. At this point, I will alert the attendees to the survey that I have just brought up on your screen. We do ask that you take a moment to fill out this survey, as it does help us in planning for future presentations. This does conclude today's session. To disconnect, simply hang up and exit out of your browser windows.